Good morning. Welcome again to Morning Devotions, and thank you again so much for our time together. I'd like us to go back to the book of Acts today and just remember that God keeps His promises. Just one verse that we read today. Acts chapter 7, verse 17. As the time drew near for God to fulfill His promise to Abraham, the number of our people in Egypt greatly increased. Now, this is telling the story of the Exodus. Now notice the exactness of that speech. As the time grew near for God to fulfill His promise to Abraham. But Abraham had been long dead. Now there's two things I want you to see here. First is the truth of generational promises. That when God makes a promise, just because the person He promised died, doesn't mean that the promise is not going to carry on. Now I don't believe in generational curses. Please forgive me. I'm not into all that. I don't see any of that in the Scripture. I understand family culture and how children are raised in a family culture that perpetuates failure. People are raised in a family culture that perpetuates sin, yes, but I'm not into generational curses. When we're born again, forgive me, Satan's power is broken off of our lives. But I do very strongly believe in generational promises. That God make promises to one of our relatives in the past, and God will fulfill those promises in our life. The second thing I want you to see here is, have you ever asked yourself the question, why does God keep promises He made to dead people? Because we're thinking like a human. They're not dead. They laid their bodies down, but they're still alive. Though it was hundreds of years later, Abraham was with God in heaven. Now God is looking at the person He made the promise to. He's not going to say, well, you know, I didn't do this while you were on earth, so never mind, I'm not going to keep my promises to you anymore. You're in heaven now, so that promise is voided. There was a limitation on that time of that promise. No, God is a God who keeps His promises. Now, that was so simple, some of you are shaking your heads, go, wait a minute, now, just think a minute. God made a promise to Abraham. It's hundreds of years later, Abraham has died. But Abraham is still alive. He's just in heaven. In our minds, he's dead because he laid his body down. But in God's eyes, he's alive because he's with God in heaven. He's there in the face of God. So of course God keeps His promises. God is fulfilling promises that He made to my grandfather and to my great-grandmother and to my great-uncle. I'm seeing those promises fulfilled in my life. It's not about a time span of one lifetime on a promise of God. God keeps His promises.